Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us again today for our chapter book story time. It's another Monday. Hope you guys all had a wonderful Christmas last week and that you have an excellent New Year's coming up. So we're continuing in Nutcracker by E.T.A. Hoffman, and this is illustrated by Roberto Innocenti. We are on the third chapter called Marie's Sweetheart. All right. Marie wasn't ready to leave the display of Christmas presents just yet, for she had noticed something new. When Fritz's soldiers halted to the right of the tree, a very splendid little man had become visible, standing unobtrusively as if waiting until it was his turn to be seen. You might have found fault with his figure. His body was too tall and fat for his legs, which were short and skinny, and his head was much too large for his body. The elegance of his costume, however, made up for a great deal. Here's a picture of this man that they are talking about. Can you see the Nutcracker? It showed him to be a person of taste and cultivation. He was wearing a purple military jacket with knobs and braid all over, pantaloons of the same purple as the jacket, and the finest boots ever seen on an officer. Boots which fit his little legs as if they had been painted on. It was strange, however, that for all this fine style, he wore over his shoulders a rather ridiculous short cloak that looked almost as if it were made of wood, and on his head a cap like a miner's. But in the little man's defense, Marie remembered that Godfather Drosselmeyer often showed up in the mornings wearing a terribly ugly jacket and an awful-looking cap on his head, and Godfather Drosselmeyer was wonderful to her. Marie fell in love with this little man at first sight. She gazed into his face and saw clearly that he had a very sweet personality. His green eyes, which stuck perhaps a little farther out of his head than was quite desirable, beamed up at her with kindness and good cheer. His chin was set off with a tidy beard of white cotton, which was another of his good features. This beard drew attention to the smile that was always on his bright red lips. "Oh, Papa dear," Marie said at last, "who gets that adorable present behind the tree?" "Well, that fellow is going to do plenty of good work for all of you," was the answer. "He's going to crack nuts for you, and he's going to belong to your older sister, Louise, just as much as to you and to Fritz." As Dr. Stahlbaum lifted the end of the little man's peculiar wooden cloak, the man opened his mouth wider and wider, displaying 2 rows of very white, sharp teeth. Following her father's instructions, Marie put a nut into the open mouth, and knack, he bit it in 2. The nutshells fell down, and Marie took the kernel. Ooh, here she is, under the tree. Back up a little bit so you can see. There's Marie holding the Nutcracker. Drosselmeyer looking from behind the tree. And everybody else on the side. Papa explained that this charming little man belonged to the Nutcracker family and was practicing the profession of his ancestors. "Now, Marie," said Papa, "as our friend Nutcracker seems to have made such an impression on you, he will become your special responsibility, though, as I said, Louise and Fritz are to have the same rights to employ him as you do." Marie took the little man into her arms at once and made him crack more nuts, but she was careful to pick out only the smallest so he wouldn't have to strain himself by opening his mouth too terribly wide. Then Louisa came, and he had to crack some nuts for her too. It was a duty he seemed glad to perform, for he kept on smiling graciously. Meanwhile, Fritz had gotten a little tired after so much drilling and maneuvering, so he joined his sisters. He laughed uproariously at the funny little man, who, since Fritz naturally wanted his share of the nuts, was passed from hand to hand, and to snap his mouth open and shut again. Fritz gave him all the biggest and hardest nuts he could find. All at once there was a crack, crack, and 3 teeth fell out of the Nutcracker's mouth. "Oh, my poor dear Nutcracker," Marie cried, and she grabbed him away from Fritz. The little man's lower jaw was now loose and wobbly. "A fine servant he is," said Fritz. "Calls himself a Nutcracker, yet he can't give a decent bite. He doesn't seem to know much about his business. Hand him over here, Marie. I'll keep cracking nuts even if he loses all the rest of his teeth, and his jaw in the bargain. Then we'll see what he's good for. No, no, said Marie in tears. You can't have him, my sweet Nutcracker. See how sadly he's looking at me, showing me his sore mouth. You're cruel, Fritz. You beat your horses, and I know for a fact that you've had one of your soldiers shot. Those things must be done, said Fritz. You don't understand anything about it. Nutcracker's is as much mine as yours, so hand him over. Marie began to cry in earnest, and she quickly wrapped the wounded Nutcracker up in her little pocket handkerchief. Papa and Mama came with Godfather Drosselmeyer, who took Fritz aside, much to Marie's distress. Fritz's side, much to Marie's distress. But then Papa said, I put Nutcracker in Marie's special care, and he seems to need her now. She'll have full power over him when nobody else can say a word about it. Why, I'm surprised that Fritz expects more service from a man wounded in the line of duty. As a good soldier, he ought to know better than that. Fritz was ashamed, and he resolved not to spend any more time on nuts or nutcrackers. So he crept off to the other side of the table where his soldiers, having established the necessary outposts, were encamped for the evening. Marie collected Nutcracker's lost teeth, then took a soft white ribbon from her dress to wrap around his chin. Finally, she wrapped Nutcracker, who was looking very pale and frightened, in her handkerchief even more tenderly than before. Rocking him like a child in her arms, she looked at the picture books again. But she soon grew angry, which was not usual with her, at Godfather Drosselmeyer. He kept laughing and asking her how she could make such a fuss about such an ugly little man. Remember that when Marie had first seen Nutcracker, she had been struck by the way that he resembled Godfather Drosselmeyer. The likeness now popped into her mind again. She said very seriously, Who knows, grandfather, if you were dressed the same as my darling Nutcracker and had on the same shining boots, you might look almost as handsome as he does. Then Marie became confused. She could not understand why Papa and Mama laughed so loud, or why Godfather Drosselmeyer's nose grew so red, or why he wasn't laughing as hard as before. She decided that there was probably some special reason for all of these things. Okay, on to the next chapter. It's called Wonderful Events. As you go into the sitting room in the Stahlbaum's house, on your left-hand side, you will see a tall glass cabinet set against the wall. All the children's toys are put away there for safekeeping. Louise, the elder sister, was still quite little when her father had this cabinet built. A very skillful craftsman used fine panes of glass, which he fit together so artfully that everything the children put inside looked more shining and lovely than they did ever in the children's hands. The elaborate works of art that Drosselmeyer made were stowed on the upper shelves, which Fritz and Marie could not reach. Immediately underneath, there was a shelf for the picture books. Fritz and Marie were allowed to do what they liked with the two bottom shelves. Marie claimed the lowest one of all for her doll's residence, while Fritz bunked his troops on the one above. On this Christmas Eve, Fritz set his soldiers on his shelf, while Marie pushed Miss Gertrude into a corner and settled her nice new doll in among the furniture on the bottom shelf. Then Marie invited herself to take tea and cakes with her dolls. This bottom shelf doll apartment was decorated with the utmost taste, everything being of the highest quality. If I don't know you, my attentive reader, have the satisfaction of possessing an equally well-appointed space for your dolls. Imagine, if you will, an apartment that featured a flowered sofa, a number of charming chairs, an elegant tea table, and above all, a cozy white bed where the pretty darlings could go to sleep. On the walls were hung beautiful little pictures. In such a delightful apartment as this, the new doll, whose name Marie discovered was Miss Clara, thought herself very comfortably settled. It grew quite late. Midnight was not far off, and Godfather Drosselmeyer had long ago departed, before the children could tear themselves away from all these Christmas fascinations. They sat riveted beside the glass cabinet, and their mother had to remind them several times that it was well past bedtime. Yes, I'm sure these poor men are exhausted, Fritz said, meaning his soldiers. They must be anxious to get some sleep. As long as I'm here, none of them dare to even blink their eyes. With these words, he went off to bed. But Marie begged to stay up. Just a little longer. A tiny little while longer, please, Mama. I still have a lot to arrange. As soon as everything is settled, I promise that I shall go straight to bed. Marie was always a docile, reasonable child, and so her mother let her stay with her toys a little longer. suspecting that Marie might grow so absorbed in her new doll that she would forget to extinguish the candles that were burning in the wall sconces. Mama herself blew all of them out. Only the lamp that hung from the ceiling stayed on, giving a soft, pleasant light. "Come to bed soon, Marie, or you'll never be up on time in the morning," Mama said, as she went off to her own bedroom. As soon as Marie was alone, she set rapidly to work at what she wanted most to do. Though she couldn't have said why, this was something that she had not wanted to do in her mother's presence. She'd been holding Nutcracker in one arm all this time, and now she laid him softly on the table, gently unrolled the handkerchief, and examined his wounds. Nutcracker was very pale, but at the same time, he smiled with a melancholy gentleness that went straight to Marie's heart. Here is a picture of her with the Nutcracker in bed, up on the shelf with the soldiers. "Oh, my darling little Nutcracker," she said softly. "Please don't be upset because my brother hurt you like this. He didn't mean to. You know, he's gotten a little harsh because of his soldiering and all that, but I promise you he's really a nice boy. I'll take such good care of you. I'll nurse you until you're completely better, and I'll have your teeth put in again and your shoulder set properly. Godfather Drosselmeyer will see to it. He knows how to do things." But Marie did not finish her sentence because at the mention of Godfather Drosselmeyer, her friend Nutcracker made a horrible face. A sort of sharp green lightning seemed to dart out of his eyes. This lasted only an instant, however. Just as Marie began to grow frightened, she found that she was looking at the very same kind face, with its gentle smile that she had been gazing at before. She decided that the change had been caused by some breeze that had made the lamp flicker. "Well," she said, "I certainly am silly to be scared so easily, and to think that a wooden doll could make faces at me. I really do love Nutcracker because he's so funny and sweet. I have to take the very best care of him until he's well and happy again." Then she took him in her arms, approached the cabinet, knelt down beside it, and said to her new doll, "I'm going to ask a favor of you, Miss Clara. Please give up your bed to this poor, sick, wounded Nutcracker, and make yourself as comfortable as you can on the sofa. Remember that you're well and strong yourself, or you wouldn't have such fat red cheeks. Remember, too, that there are very few dolls who have as comfortable a sofa as this to lie upon." Miss Clara sat there in her Christmas finery, looking very grand and disdainful. She wouldn't say so much as boo. "Very well," said Marie. "Why should I make such a fuss and stand on any ceremony at all?" She took the bed, moved it forward, and laid the Nutcracker tenderly down upon it. Then she took a ribbon from her own dress to wrap around his hurt shoulder. Finally, she drew the blankets up to his nose. "He won't stay with that nasty Clara," she said. She moved the small bed with Nutcracker in it to the shelf above so that it rested near the village in which Fritz's soldiers had their encampments. She closed the cabinet and moved away to go to bed. But then, listen, very lightly, very slowly, a noise arose. It whispered and rustled and crept. It was all around her, in all directions, coming from every corner of the room, from underneath the stove, under the chairs, behind the cabinets. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, then louder still, warning that it was about to strike the hour. But it didn't strike. Marie saw that the big gilt owl on its top had dropped its wings, so that they covered the whole clock. The owl stretched its cat-like head with its crooked beak a long way forward. The ticking kept growing louder and louder until it formed distinct words. "Clocks, clocking, clocking clocks, make no sound but soft tick-tocks. Mouse King has a fine-tuned ear. Purr, purr, pum, pum. Sing an ancient song of fear. Purr, purr, pum, pum. Now strike, you clocks, strike loud. He's coming soon, just as he vowed." Then the clock croaked hollowly, pum, pum, 12 times. Marie was terrified. She was ready to run away as fast as she could, but then she noticed that instead of the owl, it was Godfather Drosselmeyer on top of the clock, with his yellow coattails hanging down on both sides like wings. Quickly she steeled herself and called out in a loud voice, Godfather Drosselmeyer, what are you up there for? Come down here and don't scare me like that, you naughty man." Suddenly there began a sort of wild cheeping and squeaking everywhere, and the sounds of running and scampering, as if there were thousands of little feet behind the walls. Hundreds of lights began to glitter out through chinks in the woodwork. They were not lights. Oh no, they were glittering tiny eyes. Marie saw at last that mice were peeping everywhere, squeezing out through every crack. Soon they were totting and galloping all over the room. These were organized bodies of mice, steadily increasing, forming themselves into regular troops and squadrons, just as Fritz's soldiers had done when he was conducting maneuvers. Since Marie was not afraid of mice, as many children are, she could not help but be amused. But suddenly there came such a sharp and terrible piping noise that the blood ran cold in her veins. And then, what did she see? Dear reader, I know that you are brave of heart, but if you had seen what now came before Marie's eyes, you would have run off as fast as lightning straight into your bed and drawn the blankets way over your head. Poor Marie had no chance to run, however, for right at her feet, as if pushed by some subterranean power, there burst up a shower of sand, lime, and broken stone. 7 mouse heads with 7 shining crowns upon them rose through the floor, hissing and piping in a most horrible way. All these 7 crowned heads belonged to a single large body, which now forced its way up through the floor as well. My goodness. Here is a picture of Marie with the mice coming around in the room. There she is. This enormous creature, the Mouse King, squeaked to the assembled multitude of all 7 of its mouths in full chorus. Then the entire mouse army set itself in motion. It trotted right up to the cabinet and up to Marie, who was still standing there beside it. Marie's heart had been beating so hard with terror that she thought it would burst from her chest. Looking at the Mouse King, she felt her heart stop. Half fainting, she swayed backwards. Suddenly she heard a clink, clink, cur. Her elbow had broken a pane of the cabinet, and shards of broken glass fell to the floor, tinkling as they shattered. She felt for a moment a sharp stinging pain in her arm, but this seemed only to make her heart lighter. She heard no more of the squeaking and piping. Everything was quiet. Though she didn't dare to look, she hoped that the noise of the breaking glass had frightened the mice back into their holes. But what happened next? Behind Marie, a movement arose in the cabinet. Small, faint voices began to be heard. Wake up, it's time to fight. The battle starts this very night. Wake up, and fight, and fight. Now, tiny bells began to ring. Oh, that's my music box, cried Marie. She crouched down and saw that a bright light had arisen within the cabinet, setting all the toys in sudden motion. Dolls and figurines of all kinds were running about and struggling with tiny weapons. At this point, Nutcracker rose from his bed, cast off the blankets, and sprang with both feet onto the shelf, shouting at the top of his voice, "Knack, knack, knack, stupid mousy pack, stupid chitter chat, knack, knack, crick and crack, your skulls are going to crack." With this, he drew his little sword, waved it in the air, and cried, "My trusty friends and followers, are you ready to stand by me in this battle?" Immediately, a response came forth from 3 sword-fighting Italian clowns and their father, Pantaloon, as well as 4 chimney sweeps, 2 zither players, and a drummer. "Yes, your highness, we'll stand by you. We'll follow you to battle, whether it brings victory or death." They flung themselves after Nutcracker, who, in the excitement of the moment, had already made a perilous leap to the bottom shelf. As for the clowns and the rest of the Nutcracker's followers, the risk of this leap was not so great. After all, they were not only amply clothed, but they were also padded by soft insides made of cotton and sawdust. As a result, they plunked down like little beanbags, but poor Nutcracker would certainly have broken his arms and legs, for it was nearly 2 feet to the bottom shelf, and his body was made of fragile wood, if Miss Clara hadn't prevented a dangerous landing by catching the hero, drawn sword and all, in her tender arms. "Oh, you dear, good Clara," cried Marie, "how could I have misunderstood you so? I had thought that you were too uncaring to let dear Nutcracker have your bed." Miss Clara now exclaimed as she pressed her young heroes gently to her silken breast, "Oh, my lord, do not enter this dangerous battle, sick and wounded as you are. See how your trusty followers, the clowns, chimney sweeps, zitherman, and drummer, are already lined up below. Even the puzzle figures on my shelf are preparing for the fray. My dear lord, rest here in my arms and observe your victory from a safe location." Nutcracker refused to hold himself back. He kicked about with his legs until Clara was obliged to release him. But then, to be certain that she understood how grateful he was for her kindness, Nutcracker sank gracefully to one knee and said, "Oh, lady, the kind protection and aid that you have offered me will forever gladden my heart, in battle and in victory." At these words, Clara bowed and took hold of Nutcracker by his arms. She raised him up gently and then loosened her sash, which was ornamented with many spangles. Her plan was to drape it around his shoulders, but the little man swiftly took 2 steps back, laid his hand upon his heart, and said with much solemnity, "Oh, dear lady, do not give this mark of your favor to me, for—" He hesitated and gave a deep sigh. He then took from his shoulders the ribbon on which Marie had bandaged him and pressed it to his lips. He put it back on as a token that he was fighting for Marie. Waving and glittering his sword, he sprang like a bird over the ledge of the cabinet down to the floor. You will recall, dear reader, that even before Nutcracker had completely come to life, he had felt Marie's great love and concern for him. How then could he possibly have accepted Miss Clara's sash, no matter how elegant it was? The faithful little man preferred Marie's much commoner and less pretentious token. At that very moment, Nutcracker sprang down. The squeaking and piping began again, worse than ever. Underneath the big table, the mouse army had amassed itself, taking its orders from the terrible Mouse King with his 7 heads. The battle was about to begin. And that is it for tonight. Tomorrow you'll have to join us as we get into the battle. You guys have a great night. We'll see you later. Bye.